So as we continue in our Be Fruitful and Multiply series, might be appropriate that today's fruit of the Spirit is peace, since the Broncos are playing this afternoon, and that might be what all of us need, is a little bit of a little peace here. You might not be a Broncoholic like Brian, but it's going to be a lot of stress and anxiety for a lot of people. So this is an appropriate message today. The title of today's message is Peace, It's an Inside Job. And we're going to discover the deeper meaning of what peace really is. Jesus said in John 14:27, listen to this. He said, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I don't give it to you like the world gives it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." And in this passage, Yeshua makes it clear that the path of peace that he offers is very different from the path of peace that the world offers. The world offers us many paths of peace, if you think about it. The world offers us weapons and armies called peacemakers. The world offers us investment strategies and home security systems designed to give us peace of mind. The world offers us drugs to give us a temporary feeling of peace. But these worldly paths only provide an illusion of peace, because if history has taught us anything, it's taught us that we can never be fully safe and secure from pain or tragedy, no matter how many weapons or how much money or how much security systems or drugs we possess. To be human, if you think about it, to be human is to be vulnerable. We're not superpowers. We weren't made that way, and we're all at risk in this world because God purposely designed life in this world to be risky and perilous. Like it or not, believe it or not, you and I are utterly trapped in a crazy story that God himself wrote, the big story. And to survive our role, whatever role that you have in this twist and turn crazy story, we can either turn to the world's path for peace, or we can turn to God's path for peace. They're very different from each other, because the world only offers fragile solutions for external peace, provides very little of any inner peace, but God offers a powerful solution for inner peace that will not be affected at all by what's happening externally in our circumstances, in our world around us. And Jesus calls this kind of peace he offers in John 14:27, my peace. I love that, my peace. I'm giving you my peace. Because if we have, as we've repeated in every message in this Be Fruitful and Multiply series thus far, each of the fruit of the Spirit, including peace, comes directly from Yeshua, from Jesus, and is produced by continually remaining or abiding in him or with him. Jesus, he said in John 15:5, is the vine, we're the branches, and not one single piece of fruit of the Spirit can be produced unless we continuously abide or remain in him. And that is the premise of this series, and is especially true for this fruit of peace. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 11:28. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble, and you will have rest for your souls." The word for soul in this passage is where we get our English word psyche. And so this is God's formula for peace of mind. We come to Jesus and we yoke ourselves. We connect ourselves to him. The fruit of this connection is soul rest, inner peace in the midst of a not so peaceful world. In Hebrew, it's the word shalom, right? You've heard us teach on this word before. Shalom is the word for peace. This word doesn't simply mean the absence of conflict. It means wholeness and fullness and completion. For instance, in Hebrew, if you eat at a restaurant, when you go to pay your bill, the word you would say is leshalem, which is the word to pay. Leshalem. You can hear the word shalom in it, right? Shalom, leshalem. It's connected because they both come from the same root. So why would paying a bill in a restaurant be related to the word for peace? Well, because the root of this word is about wholeness, fullness, and completion, and eating a meal at a restaurant is never complete until you pay your bill, pay up. Once you pay your bill, your dining experience will be whole, full, complete. You'll be at peace with the restaurant and with yourself. No dine and dash. And so shalom is to experience fullness, wholeness, completion. And when we talk about inner peace or rest for our souls, it can only truly come by abiding, by remaining. And what I'd like to do is give you 3 ways that we can experience this peace when we abide in Jesus. Okay, you with me? We going on this journey together? Okay, and most important, number 1, most important, we experience peace with God. Do you know when the Bible talks about death, it never talks about life being terminated. It talks about life that is separated from something else. For instance, in physical death, it's not the end of our life, it's the separation of our soul from our body. Remember when God made Adam in Genesis? Genesis chapter 2, he takes the dust from the ground, he forms it into a human shape, and it says that he breathes his breath, his ruach, his spirit, his wind into this lifeless form, making Adam, it says, a living soul. Your body is merely a housing for your soul. When you die, your body will decompose and go back to the ground from where it came, or as Ecclesiastes 3:20 says, all come from dust, and to dust all return. That is our bodies. But thank God our bodies are not really us, because that would mean that the song is correct. We all are just dust in the wind. But fundamentally, we are a living soul. And when we die physically, our soul will exit our body, and it will continue to live on forever in eternity. And so the question of our soul is not, will it live forever in eternity, but where will it live forever in eternity? Which brings us to something called spiritual death. Spiritual death is the separation of our soul from God. It becomes disconnected. So when God breathed his breath into Adam and he became a living soul, Adam's flourishing was now forever reliant or dependent upon his relationship with God. God's breath would continue to be the agent that flourishes Adam's life. God's spirit, his ruach, would be that agent. But when Adam and Eve sought their flourishing outside of their soul connection to God, and they ate this forbidden fruit thinking that it would flourish them even more, they died spiritually. They became separated from God, and this is what happens to each of us when we disconnect our soul dependency upon God as well. It's called sin in the Bible. Isaiah mentions this. In Isaiah chapter 59:2, he says, sin separates us from God. And so unless we repair this separation here on earth, our souls will remain separated from God in eternity, which is a really, really long time. So I'm told. So in the New Testament, there's a story that we have labeled the prodigal son. And it's really a story about soul separation. Isn't it, right? The prodigal son leaves or separates or disconnects from his father. He parties all day and night until he becomes penniless. Eventually, he ends up living in squalor and he's miserable. And then he realizes that he had everything he needed back at home, and so he returns to his father. His father, who had been waiting by the window the entire time, watching and hoping that his prodigal son would return, sees him approaching home. This is what he says in verse 23, Luke 15:23. He says, "Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to party. Now wait. The son never dies in this story, does he? Well, not physically. But he did die spiritually. He became spiritually separated from his father. He became spiritually dead, but now he's spiritually alive again. This is what it means when you've heard this term born again. It just simply means that we are spiritually dead and we come back to life again through faith. His soul had been reconnected back to God, so it's time to throw a party. And Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son so that we can see how sin causes all of us to become spiritually separated from God. It's that theme through the entire Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, all the way through into the New Testament. This is why Ephesians 2:4-5 says that because of our heavenly daddy's great love for us, God, who's rich in mercy, made us spiritually alive with Jesus even when we were spiritually dead in sin. It is by grace that we're saved. Grace means that we didn't earn it. It means that we cannot lose it. It's actuated by faith. That's it. Romans 5:1 says it even clearer. It says that when we choose to exercise faith in what Jesus did on the cross to pay for our sins, we once again have peace with God, which means that our souls become reconnected to God, and we can once again breathe in tandem with God's breath. That's ground zero for inner peace. Really, this is it right here. All these 3 points I'm going to give you today, they just build on each other. They're progressive. And it not only settles the question, when we have peace of God, it not only settles the question where our soul will live for eternity, it allows us to once again take deep spiritual breaths with our Creator. And this is how we flourish. This is the path of wholeness and fullness and completion. It's interesting to note that scientific research clearly demonstrates that slow, deep breathing has profound benefits on your health. You know that? Do it. Come on, do it, because you're going to feel good. And you know, the people who are stressed or anxious or fearful, I think it's in the Jewish DNA. I just always have this kind of low-level anxiety all the time. And when you have anxiety or fear or stress in your life, you tend to take more shallow, rapid breaths. And that has a lot of health risks for you. Research is clear on that. We are created both physically and spiritually to breathe deeply in order to flourish. Isn't that cool? And I personally believe that it's because it is God's breath. It's His ruach. It's His spirit. It's His wind living in us. That's what ruach means, all three of those things. That not only begins our lives, but it also sustains our lives here on earth. And those of you who are doing the 60 by 60 experience during this series, if you're not aware of that, a lot of us are taking the time every hour. Most of us have a little app on our phone that buzzes, it either vibrates or makes a little bit of a ping sound every 60 minutes. And it's just to remind us to stop and pause and check in with God. And so if you're doing this, what you might want to do is every time your alarm goes off, every 60 minutes, you might want to take a few minutes to do some deep spiritual breathing. Imagine yourself breathing in tandem with God Himself. I've been doing it all week. It's awesome. Just thinking that I'm just right there with God, breathing. And it's a pretty cool image to get your mind. Meditate on your secure relationship with God through your faith in Yeshua. Remember that His saving grace is free. There's nothing you can do to earn it. There's nothing you can do to lose it. Jesus settled that when He died on the cross for our sins. Celebrate the fact that simply through faith, you now have peace with God. Try it. Give it a try. Do this every hour and see what it'll do to alleviate stress and anxiety and fear and bring wholeness and fullness and completeness into your inner being. My peace I give you. My peace. Okay, number 2, when we continuously abide in Jesus, we also experience peace with ourselves. I love this part, okay? Psalm 139 speaks about how God creates each one of us. He is intimately involved. I don't know how this works with genetics and everything else, but God says He is personally involved with knitting us together in our mother's womb. And He tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made by Him, and how He maps out in advance a purposeful plan for our lives. So like snowflakes, each of us is unique. No two people are exactly the same. No one has the same body structure and composition as you. Nobody. No one has the same brain neural pathways or brain chemistry as you, and which means that no one moves like you. Nobody thinks like you. Nobody dreams like you. Nobody creates like you. Nobody. Even your fingerprint is unique from everyone else on this planet, even if you are identical twin. Which means you're not completely identical Newsflash. Mostly identical twin. God doesn't make junk. And when he formed you in your mother's womb, not only did he make you a one-of-a-kind person, but he envisioned a one-of-a-kind future for you that would be filled with incredible meaning and purpose, no matter how you popped out of that womb. Ephesians 2:10 reinforces this truth when it says, we are God's workmanship, created in Messiah Yeshua to do great works, which he planned in advance for us to do. Amen. Oh, love is in the house. One of Judaism's most famous rabbis, Rabbi Hillel, was an amazing rabbi. Paul, in the New Testament, was mentored by his grandson, Rabbi Gamaliel. And so they all lived in a time period about 2,000 years ago. And if you know something about Rabbi Hillel's teaching, it's not difficult to notice that Paul's writings are partly influenced by them. And especially this passage here in Ephesians 2:10, I'm convinced that it was influenced by Gamaliel. There's a very popular quote in Judaism by Rabbi Hillel, and it says, this is really cool. It's deep, so you have to kind of go deep with me, okay? If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, who am I? If not now, when? And in Jewish thinking, the first part of this quote distinguishes between two selves, a self called I and a self called me. The I self is like the deepest, purest self. It's the way that God uniquely created us in our mother's womb. It's the purposeful plan that God envisioned for us back then. By contrast, the me self is the persona that we develop during life when our I self becomes influenced by people and events in our lives, causing it to deviate from the unique person God created us to be originally. In other words, our authentic self, the I self, becomes a false self, the me self. Hillel teaches us that if we do not rediscover our authentic I self, that the part of us that is uniquely shaped by God himself, then who are we? What value is there to our false me self? We just become a shell, a facade, a mask covering the authentic I self that God created us to be. Think about it this way. In Genesis 12:1, God comes to a man named Abram. He's not Abraham yet, but he tells him to leave what? His country, all the nationalistic and political ideologies of his country, his people, all the local societal and religious customs, and his father's household, all the family expectations and pressures. Anybody identify with any of this stuff, by the way? And he tells him to go somewhere else. It's interesting to note that the Hebrew words in this verse, go and leave, are really two Hebrew words, lech lecha, which can be read, go to yourself, or go to you. Lech lecha, go to you. And could it be that part of what God has in mind for Abraham was to discover who he really is, away from all the external influences that created maybe this false sense, me sense, self. And in doing so, Abraham would discover the wonderful purpose and plan that God had determined for him to do before the beginning of time. You shall be the father of many nations. That's a big job. Sometimes we have to leave something in order to find something better. And in this case, it's who God really made us to be. Isn't that what happened to the prodigal son? Think of that. Didn't he leave home so that ultimately he could discover who he really was, what he was really supposed to do, what he really had? You know, the text says in Luke 15:17 that he came to his senses. When he finally realizes how pathetic and miserable his life had become and how everything that he ever needed was back home with his father, it says he came to his senses. The problem is, in Greek, there's no word census. It's not there. It merely is the second person singular male pronoun, which literally translates, he came to himself. And that's super cool, I think. He had become something God never created him to be. He left himself. He left who God made him to be. And so when he realized who he really was, and when he realized how God had uniquely created him to be, and how much better God's plan was for his life than his plan for his life, he literally came back to himself. His God-given, authentic I self. Sometimes, like Abraham and the prodigal son, you have to leave, you have to go, you have to lech lecha to be found. Parents, remember this, if and when your kids seem to be getting off track. Both of our kids went on a journey like this in their teens and young adult years, and back then, Andrew and I used to say, well, they're out writing their testimony. How many of you went out and wrote your testimony? Huh? Yeah. Both my kids turned out to be really authentic adults. I love my kids. Sometimes you have to leave. You have to get lost in order to be found. There's an ancient Jewish parable that goes like this. A man once went on a journey to seek the wisdom of one of the great Hasidic leaders, who in turn asked him, for what did you come here? The man answers, to find God. Then you came for nothing. You are wasting your time. The guy goes, why? He says, because God is everywhere. Well, then tell me, master, what should I have come for? To find yourself. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if not now, when? This is the kind of whole, full, complete kind of peace we are seeking to experience by taking the time to stay connected to the vine. There's no one else on this planet like you. And when you live true to the person God created you to be and to the purpose and plan that God has for you in this life, you will experience peace with yourself. And then lastly, we can also expect to experience peace with others. This is an important part. Listen to this crazy passage. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 27 and 28, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Now that just doesn't seem right, does it? I mean, doesn't that just seem to slap against conventional wisdom? I mean, who can sincerely love their enemy? Who can genuinely do good to those who hate us? Who can bless someone who's cursing them? Who can pray for someone who's mistreating them? You might be able to pretend or do it half-heartedly, but who can do this with a pure heart? Well, let me tell you who can do this with a pure heart. Those who have truly experienced peace with God, and those who have truly experienced peace with themselves. Why? Because when you are at peace with God and you're at peace with yourself, you're no longer triggered. You know what I mean by triggered? You know, the little buttons that get pushed. Now, I chose this passage because it's extreme. You know, my buttons get pushed for a lot of things less than an enemy hating me. But almost every person's button gets pushed if somebody hates you or mistreats you or something like that. Now, why is this important? Because when we are at peace with God and when we're at peace with ourselves, those triggers aren't there. This is how Jesus was able to live the way that he did when he walked on this planet. The second part of Rabbi Hillel's quote says, "But if I am only for myself, who am I?" In other words, it's important to discover who God uniquely created us to be, but God never created to live in ego isolation. We are only fully and authentic, we are only fully our authentic selves when we understand that we are part of a greater whole called humanity. We are all brothers and sisters. We are all children of God, because every man and every woman who has ever lived, is living today, and will live in the future is made in the image and likeness of God and is therefore a precious life. This is why John 3:16 says that for God so loved the world. Why? Why did God so love the world that he gave his only son? Because everybody on this planet he handmade each person. And he's not talking here about the world's twisted values and systems that we all have to deal with. He's talking about everyone that's ever been created, all who are 100% fearlessly and wonderfully handmade by God. God loves the worst of human beings. And not until we look at our enemies and say, if not for the grace of God, there go I, we will never fully experience wholeness, fullness, and completion. Because this is an important piece to shalom. And here's even another reason. When we choose to hate those who hate us, when we resist going the extra mile when someone forces us to go 1 mile, when we refuse to turn the other cheek when they hit us on this cheek, when we won't give more from someone who steals from us, we become just like our enemy. And once again, we morph back into something God never created us to be. Ever heard the phrase, "I have met the enemy and it is me"? Let me show you a picture here. This is Mary Johnson and Osei Israel. Osei Israel killed Mary Johnson's son when he was 16 years old in a gang-related incident. Rocked her world, took her baby away from her. Filled with hate and revenge, she couldn't wait to get through the trial, and when he got 25 years in prison, it made her feel somewhat relieved, but it did not relieve the junk that she felt inside of her. And she knew, it just day by day, she just knew something different had to happen. The hate that she had was just welling up in her. It was making her sick. So eventually she began to pray that she could just forgive him. And she did that for a while, and that helped a little bit, but she knew she had to do more. So she made plans to go to the prison and visit with Osei. And there she said, "Truly, as much as I can from my heart, I forgive you for killing my son." He reached out and hugged her. She fell to the ground. And in her words said the junk just began to just drip off her. They developed a relationship. She started visiting him in prison. Eventually, the two of them began to teach forgiveness in the prison. When he was released on parole, she came and picked him up and threw him a welcome home party. Today, they live next door to each other, and they travel around the world teaching forgiveness. Yeah. We are called to be a people who are at peace with others. The rest of the world needs this if they are ever going to find peace with God. Osei made peace with God in prison. And we need it if we're ever going to be full and whole and complete human beings. And I realize that many of us have been hurt and wounded by others, and that loving them is easier said than done. But the path to true peace, to wholeness, fullness, and completion begins peace with God That leads to peace with ourselves, and that leads to peace with others. It moves in that type of a progression. So I wanted to end by giving you one picture. We do this communion. It's a picture of what Jesus did with his disciples on the night that he was betrayed. It was Passover. It was a Seder. They were having a Seder together. And in the Seder, you have unleavened bread, and he had matzah. Probably don't look like the matzah we ate today, but it was a flatbread. And during the Seder, he breaks the bread as you would in a Seder, and he said, "This is my body broken for you." He's giving them this picture. He takes the cup. It says after the meal. It would have been the third cup. In a Seder, you've got 4 cups, and the third cup comes after the meal. Luke tells us he took the cup after the meal. All of these cups have a name to them. The third cup is named the cup of redemption. He said, "This is my blood poured out for you." You know, you've been celebrating Passover for hundreds of years. Celebrates the slaughter of the lamb and his blood put on your doorpost. The angel of death pass over your life. It was a picture of what I would do for you, the ultimate Passover lamb. And so the next day when he's hanging on the cross, just before he takes his last breath, he yells out this word in Greek, tetelestai. It's an accounting term. If you bought something on credit and then you paid it off, when you brought your bill in for the final payment, they would stamp, I don't know, write or stamp or etch the word tetelestai. It means paid in full. Connect that back to the Hebrew word, leshalem. When you pay your bill at a restaurant, paid in full, peace out. By the way, Jesus was a Jew. I bet he said leshalem. You get the picture, right? God's blood, God himself came out of heaven to pay for our sins. We couldn't do it. And it was with his blood that he wrote leshalem. So I'd like you to have that picture. If you come up, we have an open communion here. Everyone's invited to come. We have wine and grape juice, so choose wisely which one you want to take. There's matzah here. There's also some gluten-free matzah, so there's choices. You can have the gluten-free body of Jesus today. Only in Cornerstone do we remove the gluten out of Jesus' body. But if you do choose to come down and take a deep breath. Grab the elements, go back to your seat. Hang on to them. We'll pause in this next worship song and take it together. Father, I pray that you'd make this a meaningful experience for all of us here, whether we come forward or we don't. And if there's anybody here that hasn't made peace with you, I just pray this would be the moment just to say yes. That's all it is, just choosing a path of faith. Just like Abraham, he got up and he went, and it says that it was credited righteousness to him because he believed and he went. Lech lecha, he came to himself. He came to you, he came to himself. And so make this meaningful, God, in Yeshua's name. Amen.